The member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would like to associate myself with the remarks made in the House by the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition following the very sad passing of Betty Cuthbert recently. And I want to commend both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition on their incredibly moving speeches in tribute to a person who will last throughout the ages as one of Australia's greatest athletes. I think for a person whose interest in sport is little known, it was a surprise to me in 2000 how infectious the Sydney Olympic Games were for our city and for me personally. And there are a few events in our life, I suspect, that will ever match the spirit that we saw in Sydney during 2000. I was extraordinarily privileged to have the opportunity to attend the opening ceremony of the 2000 Olympics. And I think for every Australian in that stadium, it was one of the most exciting, moving, exhilarating, incredible experiences as the world's eyes looked to our city. But of course, the most poignant moment of that whole ceremony was that leading up to the lighting of the Olympic flame. And to this day, I will never forget the reaction of the crowd as Betty Cuthbert appeared on the track, pushed as she was in her wheelchair by Raylene Boyle. And when she came into the stadium arena, the crowd was exhilarated, but also just so incredibly moved. And then to see her hand the flame to her good friend Dawn Fraser, and to be reminded of her own Olympic contribution during those games was something that I will forever treasure. And it was appropriate that she played that role at the Sydney Olympics, both for her sporting record and achievements, but also because it reminded us that she became Australia's golden girl at the first and previous time that the Olympics were held in Australia at the 1956 Melbourne Olympics. And I can only imagine that for Melbourne, for Australia, to be hosting those Olympics in the 1950s would have created the same sense of excitement and anticipation that Sydney did in 2000. And just as athletes like Cathy Freeman starred and had us our hearts stopped as she completed her own race in 2000. The whole nation would have been behind and just so overjoyed to see the success of Betty Cuthbert at the 1956 Olympics. She was, of course, one of our greatest athletes, and at those 56 Olympics, she was able to walk away with 3 gold medals. She was then to achieve a 4th gold medal at the Rome Olympics 8 years later. That, of course, followed a period in which, like many athletes, she had retired from the sport, but got the calling to return to the vocation that she loved. And, of course, followed those 1960 Olympics in Tokyo, where, due to an injury, she sadly had to bow out of competition. And to see her come back 8 years after her great achievements in 1956 and win the 400 metres was something that I know excited all Australians at the time. Of course, those 4 gold medals are really the pinnacle of what was an incredible athletic career. And it's worthwhile reflecting on the fact that during her career, she recorded world records for the 60 metres, the 100 metres, the 200 metres, the 220 yards and the 440 yards. She is the only athlete, according to my understanding, male or female, who to this day holds world records, holds gold medals for all 3 sprint events, the 100, the 200 and the 400. And of course for 40 years, alongside Murray Rose and Dawn Fraser, she was one of those only 3 athletes who had ever been able to record winning 4 gold medals for Australia in the Olympics. And she was only to be beaten in that record by Ian Thorpe at the 2004 Olympics in Athens. But of course, all of those records and achievements, as worthy as they are, say little about Betty Cuthbert the person. And what we know of Betty was an incredibly modest person who didn't want the public acclaim and accolades, who in fact was extremely uncomfortable by becoming a national hero as she did. In fact, after the 56 Olympics, she went back to working at her father's nursery and tried to avoid the media spotlight. But she also recognised in 1969, when she was first diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, that she could be an example, and how brave she was to endure for so long that disease, which saw her wheelchair bound in the end, and which saw her legs, that which drove her to such fame, wither away underneath her as she became incapacitated with MS. 2000 reminded us of that bravery, as did so much that she did during the course of her life. So today, I think it is important that we reflect upon Australia's golden girl, a truly great Australian that we continue to be proud because of her achievements. And we thank her family, and particularly Rhonda Gillam, her long-time friend in Western Australia who cared for her during those last decades when she was suffering MS. A Sydney girl originally, a Western Australian in the end, but a great Australian. Vale, Betty Cuthbert.